The morning fog hung thick over the French countryside on the 16th of October, 1944, as Private First Class Harold Thompson crouched in a muddy foxhole just outside the village of Bruyères. The 23-year-old marksman from rural Montana had been arguing with his company commander for the past 20 minutes, insisting he could accomplish what seemed impossible. Captain Robert Mitchell had heard plenty of bold claims from soldiers trying to prove themselves, but what Thompson was proposing sounded less like confidence and more like a dangerous delusion. Thompson believed he could neutralize 8 separate machine gun positions that had his entire company pinned down, using nothing but his Springfield rifle and the skills he had learned hunting elk in the Bitterroot Mountains. What he did not know yet was that within the next 4 hours, he would prove every doubt wrong and rewrite the tactical manual on what a single determined rifleman could achieve. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one soldier's seemingly impossible claim transformed from perceived madness into one of the most remarkable displays of marksmanship in American military history, forcing an entire German defensive position to crumble and teaching his superiors that sometimes the most audacious solutions come from the most unexpected places. Captain Mitchell wiped the rain from his face and looked at Thompson with a mixture of frustration and concern. The young private had been in country for only 6 weeks, arriving as a replacement after the brutal fighting in the Vosges Mountains had depleted the 3rd Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment. Mitchell had seen too many eager soldiers get themselves eliminated trying to be heroes, and he was not about to let another one throw his life away on a fool's errand. The situation was dire, no question about that. German forces had established a defensive line along a tree-covered ridge overlooking the American positions, and 8 heavy machine gun emplacements were positioned with interlocking fields of fire that made any advance across the open ground a death sentence. 2 companies had already attempted to push forward that morning, and both had been forced back with heavy casualties. The machine guns were dug in behind reinforced positions, protected by sandbags, and positioned to cover every possible approach route. Thompson knelt beside his captain and pointed toward the ridgeline, speaking with the calm assurance of someone who had done complex calculations in his head. He explained that he had been observing the German positions since dawn, timing the firing patterns of each machine gun crew, noting when they fired, when they paused to reload, and identifying the slight variations in their positions when the barrels needed cooling. He had mapped out 8 distinct positions in his mind, numbered them from left to right, and identified the primary gunner position for each one based on muzzle flash patterns and the slight movement of vegetation when the crews shifted positions. Mitchell listened but remained skeptical. The private was describing shooting targets he could barely see from nearly 400 yards away, through morning fog and intermittent rain while under potential return fire. The captain had marksmen in his company, good shots who had proven themselves in combat, but what Thompson was proposing required more than just accuracy. It required an almost superhuman combination of patience, calculation, and nerve. Private First Class James Rodriguez, a squad leader who had been with the company since the landing in southern France, had been listening to the conversation from the next foxhole over. Rodriguez had seen Thompson on the practice range back at the rear area, and while the Montana kid could certainly shoot, combat was different from punching holes in paper targets. Rodriguez called over to Mitchell, suggesting they at least let Thompson try. The way Rodriguez saw it, they were stuck anyway. And if Thompson wanted to draw fire and reveal his position, that might at least give them better intelligence on the German positions. Thompson shook his head at that suggestion. He was not planning to draw fire or reveal his position. His entire plan depended on remaining undetected while systematically eliminating each gun crew, one at a time, creating confusion and forcing the Germans to wonder where the fire was coming from. He explained his strategy in detail. He would fire a single shot, immediately displace to a different position he had already prepared 50 yards away, wait for the German reaction, then fire again from a 3rd position. By the time the Germans figured out where he might be shooting from, he would already be somewhere else. What made Thompson's confidence particularly striking was the specificity of his observations. He described how the second machine gun position from the left had a crew that changed positions every 12 to 15 minutes, rotating their gunner to prevent fatigue. The fourth position had a slight gap in its sandbag protection on the right side, visible only when the sun broke through the clouds at a certain angle. The sixth position had been firing shorter bursts than the others, suggesting either a less experienced crew or a weapon that was overheating faster than normal. Captain Mitchell studied the young private's face, looking for signs of bravado or false confidence. But what he saw instead was the focused intensity of someone who had spent his entire life reading landscapes and calculating distances. Thompson had grown up hunting in terrain, not unlike this French countryside, where a single shot often meant the difference between feeding his family for a week or going home empty-handed. He did not waste ammunition, and he did not take shots he could not make. The captain made a decision that surprised even himself. He told Thompson he would give him 2 hours. If the private could eliminate even 3 of those machine gun positions, it would create enough of a gap for the company to attempt a flanking maneuver. But Mitchell also made it clear that at the first sign Thompson was getting himself into trouble, he was ordering him back immediately. The lives of the entire company potentially depended on what happened next, and Mitchell was not going to gamble everything on one soldier's confidence. Thompson gathered his equipment with the methodical care of a craftsman preparing for important work. He checked his Springfield rifle for the 3rd time that morning, ensuring the action was clean and the barrel was clear. He selected 30 rounds of ammunition from his supply, inspecting each cartridge individually for any signs of damage or corrosion. He filled his canteen from a nearby water source, knowing that dehydration could affect his vision and steady his hand. He removed everything from his uniform that might reflect light or make noise, including his dog tags, which he wrapped in cloth and tucked inside his shirt. Sergeant Paul DeMarco, the company's most experienced non-commissioned officer, watched Thompson's preparations with growing respect. DeMarco had been fighting since North Africa and had learned to recognize the difference between soldiers who talked and soldiers who delivered. The way Thompson was moving, the deliberate efficiency of his actions, reminded DeMarco of the best snipers he had worked with in previous campaigns. The sergeant approached Mitchell and quietly suggested they have observers ready with binoculars to track Thompson's shots and confirm results. If the kid actually pulled this off, they would need to know immediately so they could exploit any gaps in the German line. At 0730 hours, Thompson moved out from the American positions, crawling through the wet grass with his rifle cradled in his arms. He had identified 3 primary shooting positions during his morning observation, each offering a different angle on the German ridgeline, and each position to allow for rapid displacement. His first position was behind a fallen oak tree, approximately 200 yards forward of the American foxholes, offering a slight elevation advantage and cover from direct observation. The young private reached his first position and settled in, controlling his breathing and letting his heart rate slow to a steady rhythm. Through his rifle sight, he could see the leftmost machine gun position clearly now, the sandbag emplacement dark against the morning sky. He watched and waited, counting the seconds between bursts of fire, noting the rhythm of the crew's operations. The Germans were firing in disciplined patterns, conserving ammunition, while maintaining enough suppressive fire to keep the Americans pinned down. Thompson calculated the shot in his mind. The range was approximately 380 yards, with a slight crosswind from the left and a downward angle of roughly 8 degrees. The morning air was cool and damp, which would affect the bullet's trajectory minimally, but needed to be accounted for. He adjusted his aim point 6 inches to the right and 2 inches high, compensating for wind and distance. Then he waited for his moment. The moment came when the German machine gun fired a long burst, the gunner focused on targets to Thompson's left. As the firing stopped, and before the crew could adjust their position, Thompson squeezed the trigger with the smooth pressure he had practiced 10,000 times in the Montana wilderness. The rifle cracked once, and through his scope, Thompson saw the German gunner collapse backward into the trench. He did not wait to confirm the result. Immediately, he began low crawling toward his second position, moving with practiced efficiency through the undergrowth. Behind him, he could hear confused shouting from the German lines as the crew at the first position tried to understand what had just happened. There had been no artillery, no machine gun fire, just one single shot from an unknown location. At the American positions, Captain Mitchell and Sergeant DeMarco watched through binoculars as the leftmost German machine gun suddenly went silent. DeMarco focused on the position, seeing Germans moving frantically behind the sandbags, clearly responding to an emergency. The sergeant looked at Mitchell with raised eyebrows, but neither man spoke. 1 down, 7 to go. Thompson reached his second position, a shallow depression behind a cluster of rocks about 70 yards from his first location. From here, he had a clear line of sight to the third and fourth German positions. He settled in again, controlling his breathing, letting his muscles relax into the shooting position. This time he waited longer, nearly 15 minutes, allowing the Germans time to settle back into their routine after the confusion of the first shot. The third machine gun position was the most heavily fortified, with reinforced sandbags and what appeared to be additional protection from steel plating. Thompson had noticed during his morning observation that this crew was also the most active, firing more frequently and with longer bursts than the other positions. He studied the position carefully, looking for any vulnerability in their protection. Then he saw it. When the gunner fired a long burst, the barrel would heat up and create a slight shimmer in the air directly above the weapon. More importantly, the assistant gunner would lean forward slightly to check the ammunition belt feed, exposing his upper body for just a few seconds. Thompson waited for the pattern to repeat itself, confirming the timing, then prepared his shot. The machine gun opened up again, firing a sustained burst at American positions to the south. Thompson counted the seconds, watching the assistant gunner's position. As predicted, the soldier leaned forward to check the belt feed. Thompson's rifle cracked once more, and the assistant gunner went down. The primary gunner, suddenly without support and likely startled by the shot, stopped firing and ducked below the sandbags. This time Thompson moved even faster, knowing that the Germans would be actively searching for him now. He crawled to his third prepared position, another 80 yards to the south, positioned behind a small rise that offered both cover and a different shooting angle on the remaining positions. Private First Class George Washington Carter, an observer positioned with Captain Mitchell, was tracking Thompson's movement through binoculars. Carter, a former college student from Philadelphia who had volunteered immediately after hearing about Pearl Harbor, had initially thought Thompson's plan was suicide. But watching the young marksman work, seeing the disciplined movement and the precise shooting, Carter began to understand he was witnessing something extraordinary. He updated the captain on each movement, whispering positions and observations, as Thompson systematically worked his way through the German line. The German forces on the ridge were now actively searching for the source of the shots. Thompson could see them moving behind their positions, pointing in various directions, clearly arguing about where the fire was coming from. Some thought it was a sniper team operating from the American lines. Others believed it might be a French resistance fighter, operating from the woods to the north. None of them appeared to have identified Thompson's actual positions. From his third location, Thompson had clear shots at positions 2, 5, and 6. He chose position 5 as his next target because it was the centermost of the German line, and its elimination would create the most confusion. This position had a crew of 4 visible soldiers rotating between the gun and what appeared to be an observation post slightly behind the main emplacement. Thompson watched their pattern for nearly 20 minutes, patient as a predator, waiting for the perfect opportunity. His patience was rewarded when 3 of the crew members gathered briefly behind the position, apparently receiving orders or discussing the situation. The primary gunner remained at the weapon, scanning the American positions through a sight. The shot was more difficult this time, nearly 410 yards with the morning wind picking up slightly. Thompson adjusted for the increased range and the shifting wind, aiming almost a full 12 inches to the right and 4 inches high. He exhaled slowly, letting his body settle into absolute stillness, and pressed the trigger. The gunner at position 5 collapsed over his weapon, and immediately the other crew members scattered, diving for cover, but Thompson was already moving again, this time toward a position he had prepared even farther south, creating an angle that would make the Germans think multiple shooters were operating from different directions. On the German ridge, confusion was turning into something approaching panic. Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber, the German officer commanding the defensive position, was trying to make sense of what was happening to his line. 3 of his machine gun positions had been hit by precise fire from an unknown source, and his men were now afraid to expose themselves above their protective cover. Weber had fought on the Eastern Front and in Italy, and he had never encountered a situation quite like this. There was no artillery preparation, no massed infantry assault, just single precise shots that were systematically dismantling his defensive position. Weber ordered his remaining gun crews to fire at maximum rate in all directions, hoping either to suppress the unknown shooter or to force him to reveal his position. The German machine guns opened up in a furious barrage, bullets tearing through the French countryside in every direction. The noise was tremendous, a continuous roar of overlapping fire that seemed to shake the very ground. Thompson pressed himself flat behind a stone wall, listening to the bullets snap overhead and impact around his position. He had anticipated this reaction and had specifically chosen his fourth position to be protected from the kind of wild, suppressive fire the Germans were now employing. He waited calmly for the barrage to end, knowing the crews could not sustain that rate of fire for long without overheating their weapons. After nearly 5 minutes, the firing began to slow as the German machine guns dealt with overheating issues and depleted ammunition. Thompson could hear the distinctive sound of barrels being changed and crews shouting for more ammunition. This was exactly the moment he had been waiting for. From his protected position, Thompson now had clear sightlines to positions 2, 4, 6, and 8. He made a quick decision to accelerate his timeline. Instead of systematically eliminating one position at a time, he would take advantage of the confusion and strike multiple targets in rapid succession. He fired at position 2 first, where a gunner was in the process of replacing an overheated barrel. The shot struck true, and the soldier fell backward. Without pausing, Thompson shifted his aim to position 4, where an assistant gunner was feeding a new belt of ammunition into the weapon. Another shot, another German soldier down. He shifted again to position 6, catching a gunner who had exposed himself to clear a jam in his weapon. A third shot in less than 30 seconds, and a third position neutralized. The German line was now in complete chaos. Of the 8 original machine gun positions, 6 were now either completely silent or firing only sporadically with reduced crews. Oberleutnant Weber was shouting orders, trying to reorganize his defense, but his men were now convinced they were facing an entire team of expert marksmen rather than a single shooter. Captain Mitchell watched through his binoculars in stunned amazement. Private Thompson had done exactly what he said he would do, and he had done it in less than 90 minutes. The captain immediately began issuing orders to his platoon leaders, preparing to exploit the gaps in the German line. But he also knew they needed to move fast, before the Germans could reinforce their positions or bring up additional support. Thompson had one more task to complete. Position 8, the rightmost machine gun emplacement, was still fully operational and positioned to fire on any American advance from the south. He had saved this position for last because it had the smallest crew, just 2 visible soldiers, and was positioned slightly behind the main defensive line, suggesting it might be a command or observation post as well. The young marksman relocated one final time, moving to a position almost 200 yards south of where he had started. From this angle, he could see position 8 clearly, and more importantly, he could see that the crew was now focused entirely on the chaos developing to their north, trying to understand what was happening to the rest of their line. Thompson settled into his final shooting position, taking extra care with this shot because he knew it might be his last opportunity before the Germans reorganized. The range was just over 400 yards, with a stronger crosswind now that the morning was progressing. He watched the crew carefully, noting their movements and positions. The shot presented itself when both German soldiers moved to the northern side of their emplacement, apparently trying to get a better view of the other positions. For just a few seconds, they were positioned close together, focused on the distance. Thompson aimed carefully, compensating for the increased wind and the long range, and fired his final shot. The bullet struck the primary gunner in the chest, and the impact threw him backward into his companion. Both soldiers went down, and the machine gun fell silent. Thompson did not move immediately this time. He remained in position, watching through his rifle scope as the entire German defensive line began to collapse. With all 8 machine gun positions now silent or severely reduced in effectiveness, the German infantry that had been supporting the position began pulling back toward secondary positions farther up the ridge. Oberleutnant Weber, recognizing that his position was no longer tenable, ordered a general withdrawal. At the American positions, Captain Mitchell was already moving his company forward. The gaps that Thompson had created in the German line now allowed for a rapid advance that would have been impossible just 2 hours earlier. The company moved in squad rushes, covering each other's movement, taking advantage of the confusion in the German ranks. Thompson remained in his final shooting position, providing overwatch as his company advanced. He fired several more shots during the advance, not at German soldiers, but at equipment and positions, keeping the defenders suppressed and unable to reorganize. His role had shifted from eliminating specific targets to providing general suppression and support. By 1100 hours, the American forces had secured the ridgeline. The German defenders had withdrawn to positions more than a kilometer to the east, conceding the high ground they had held for nearly 3 weeks. The cost to the American forces was remarkably light, just 4 wounded and no fatalities during the advance. A dramatic contrast to the heavy casualties suffered in earlier attempts to take the same ground. When Thompson finally returned to the company command post, he found Captain Mitchell, Sergeant DeMarco, and most of the company's leadership waiting for him. The captain looked at the young private with a mixture of respect and disbelief, still processing what he had just witnessed. Mitchell asked Thompson how many shots he had fired in total. The private checked his ammunition pouches and reported that he had fired exactly 19 rounds, which meant he had achieved his objectives with remarkable efficiency, wasting almost no ammunition. Sergeant DeMarco walked the ridgeline after it was secured, examining the German positions Thompson had engaged. At each location, he found evidence of precise marksmanship, single shots that had struck exactly where they needed to strike to neutralize the position. DeMarco had seen a lot of good shooting in his career, but nothing like this. He collected statements from the German prisoners who had been captured during the withdrawal, and their testimony confirmed what the Americans had observed. The German soldiers reported that they had believed they were under attack by a team of at least 5 or 6 expert snipers, and that the psychological impact of the invisible, precise fire had been devastating to their morale. What made Thompson's achievement even more remarkable was what happened over the following days. Word of the action spread through the division, and then through the entire 7th Army. Other units began requesting that Thompson provide marksmanship instruction to their designated marksmen. The division commander personally visited Thompson's company to hear the story firsthand and to understand the tactics that had been employed. Thompson's approach was carefully documented and incorporated into training materials. His emphasis on patient observation, preparation of multiple firing positions, and rapid displacement between shots became standard doctrine for American marksmen. The concept of using a single, well-trained rifleman to systematically neutralize a superior defensive position was proven effective, and it changed how commanders thought about employing their best shooters. But perhaps the most significant impact was personal rather than tactical. Captain Mitchell wrote a detailed after-action report describing Thompson's actions, and that report worked its way up through the chain of command. Thompson was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that day, one of the highest decorations for valor the American military could bestow. The citation specifically noted that his actions had saved numerous American lives and had achieved a tactical objective that would have otherwise required a major assault with significant casualties. Thompson himself remained characteristically modest about the achievement. When interviewed by a Stars and Stripes reporter several weeks later, he explained that he had simply applied the skills he had learned hunting in Montana to a different kind of problem. He pointed out that elk were much harder to hit than stationary machine gun positions, and that the mountains back home had taught him patience and precision long before he ever put on a uniform. The young private continued serving with his company through the rest of the European campaign, participating in the drive into Germany and the final collapse of German resistance in the spring of 1945. He survived the conflict and returned to Montana, where he lived a quiet life, rarely speaking about his wartime experiences, except when asked directly. Captain Mitchell went on to command a battalion and later wrote a memoir about his experiences in the conflict. An entire chapter of that memoir was devoted to the morning Thompson silenced 8 machine gun positions, and Mitchell reflected on how the incident had taught him never to dismiss a soldier's confidence when it was backed by genuine skill and careful preparation. The captain noted that some of the best tactical innovations of the conflict came not from staff officers with maps and planning documents, but from individual soldiers who understood their craft at a fundamental level. The German officer, Oberleutnant Weber, survived the conflict as well. In post-conflict interviews, he described the action at Brières as one of the most psychologically difficult moments of his military career. He explained that facing massed artillery or infantry assaults was terrifying but comprehensible. What happened that morning in October was different, a kind of invisible, precise threat that his training had not prepared him to counter. Weber noted that after that experience, he never again felt completely secure in a defensive position, always wondering if somewhere out there, another soldier like Thompson was patiently observing, calculating, and preparing to strike. The tactical lessons from Thompson's action continued to influence military thinking long after the conflict ended. The United States military, and later other armed forces around the world, invested heavily in developing precision marksmanship programs. The concept of highly trained individual marksmen who could achieve strategic effects became a central part of modern infantry doctrine. While Thompson could not have known it at the time, his actions that October morning helped establish the foundation for what would eventually become modern sniper doctrine. The 8 machine gun positions that Thompson silenced were later examined by military analysts studying the action. The precision of his shooting was remarkable, each shot placed exactly where it needed to be to neutralize the position with minimal ammunition expenditure. The analysts calculated that achieving the same result through conventional assault would have required at least 2 companies of infantry and would have resulted in an estimated 30 to 40 casualties. One man, 19 bullets, and careful observation had accomplished what would have otherwise required hundreds of soldiers and significant bloodshed. In the small farming community where Thompson grew up in Montana, there is today a simple memorial plaque at the local school he attended. The plaque does not mention the 8 machine guns or the Distinguished Service Cross. It simply notes that Harold Thompson, class of 1939, served his country with distinction and returned home to live a life of quiet dignity. Those who knew him best said that Thompson never considered himself a hero, just a Montana boy who could shoot straight and who did what needed to be done when the moment required it. The story of that October morning has been told and retold in military training schools, used as a case study in the application of individual skill to tactical problems. It has been analyzed for the psychological aspects of precision fire, for the importance of thorough reconnaissance and preparation, and for the value of trusting soldiers who demonstrate genuine competence rather than mere bravado. What began as a captain's skepticism toward a private's seemingly delusional claim ended as one of the most remarkable individual achievements of the entire conflict. Thompson proved that sometimes the most effective solution to a complex tactical problem is not more firepower or more soldiers, but one person with the right skills, the right preparation, and the absolute confidence that comes from genuine mastery of their craft. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.